South Korea's Hagwons are back in international headlines, and this time around the focus lies on their role in the happiness of families and their children. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Thursday, February 26th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. In a few districts here in Seoul, children reportedly as young as 4 are taking level tests to enroll in English language preschools, while children in elementary school seek to enter medical school preparation tracks. Now, for more on this, I have Chloe Borgnon with French broadcaster France 24 here in the studio. Chloe, welcome back.
Hello, thank you for having me.
I also have Thomas Maresca with the American news agency UPI with us. Thomas, it's great to have you here.
Thanks, great to be here.
Right, Thomas, let's start with you. Let's begin then with a recap of this latest article by the New York Times with regard to South Korea's academic fervor, and of course your takeaways.
Right, so, I think we've all covered, foreign journalists and local journalists alike have covered this sort of academic pressure cooker that, South Korean students go through. This article had an interesting kind of perspective on it, which is sort of, as you mentioned in the lead-in, about, it focuses on these cram schools or hagwons and just the level of intense competition even to get into these schools, like how deep this has gotten and the younger age of the students. And so it's almost like before you climb the ladder to take, ultimately leading up to taking this sunung or the college entrance exam test, kids are fighting to parents are fighting to get their kids into these cram schools. And, the amount of time that they're spending on it is, almost like a second full-time job. They mentioned some of them are going 40 hours a week, outside of their normal schooling. But the article is also interesting kind of in that it focuses on the effect on families and parents, and particularly on mothers, and that's sort of who they follow in this story. There's one woman that's sort of the maybe lead character in the story named Lee Kyung-min, who's a mother of a couple of daughters, and she talks about, just having her kids kind of on this track and explaining to them that you need to do this because, this is how we get success in the society, and you need to go to a good school and then you'll have a happy life. And at one point her daughter, who was I think 8 at the time, asked her well, Mom, were you a bad student? Implying like you seem so unhappy. And, she said that was kind of this wake up call for her. And she started to question just what this is all about and what am I putting my kids through? And, it seems to be addressing that a lot of parents are asking these questions and a lot of people in this society are asking this question. But at the same time, it's difficult to kind of get off of this track. I think a lot of parents are sort of facing that. And this woman that is the focus of the story, she was a professional, I guess like an ad exec or something, and then maybe was raising her kids, but then she went back to become a psychologist, or she got a psychology degree and has become a therapist and is talking to, sort of seems to be specializing in this, is talking to a lot of parents and, children and parents, and a lot of the mothers that she is describing, and she's based in this Gangnam area, and particularly in this neighborhood, Daechi, which is, I guess, has this incredible concentration of these hagwons. And, the mothers are expressing just this, how conflicted they are and how stressed out they are. I mean, and obviously the kids, we've seen, the psychological effect of the academic pressure on them, and suicide rates, even depression rates, they mention in the story. And so it's, it's sort of presenting the complexity of this picture where I think even a lot of parents, they don't think it's healthy for their kids and they see the kids struggling, but there's also, it's difficult to kind of figure out a way to get off the track in this society. So that's sort of, some of the takeaways from it.
Right. Chloe, Korea's intense academic pursuits, they've been covered by the foreign media quite a bit. It's nothing new. But what do you suppose makes this particular coverage so interesting?
I would say that the main thing is, as Thomas has mentioned actually, is the fact that they're following the mothers. It's kind of hard to access the parents actually when you're doing piece on hagwon for multiple reasons. First thing is they're not there in the hagwon with the kids, so they're probably the hardest people to get when you want to do interviews. And there's also the thing is, as Thomas just mentioned at the end now, is they do know that they're trying to do their best for their children, and then as foreign journalists, you will probably come and discuss it and try to understand why they're putting their kid under pressure. So it could be kind of a bit of a hard position, and I do feel that in this article, they were able to get some very trustful answers, and it's interesting to see the parents saying, I don't know actually if I'm doing the best or not. And because of that, they have been able to question this very long-established and well-established system. One of the numbers that I found, one of the figures I found quite interesting in the article is that they're saying 80% of the students, like up to high school, are going to hagwons, so to night school here in Korea. So it's kind of hard for the parents to go against the flow and go against what's going on. But in the same time, in the article, some people were speaking about the search of well-being for their kids, and as Thomas has mentioned, we see some effects from this very early on stress that is being put onto the kids. They're getting way more anxious. They'll sometimes have depressions as early as 10 years old. Self-harm has also been discussed in the article, and also for the parents, it's putting a lot of pressure on them, and I think that's what was quite different probably in this article and was really putting a new perspective on this, on the hagwon, and you can or cannot get to a different direction with your kids.
Thomas, what do you believe is driving these hagwon, which are cram schools, of course, hagwon-based academic ambitions here in South Korea?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really just the baked into the system kind of, we're starting from this level of intense competition in South Korea, and some of it's just the entire way that I guess South Korea developed economically and the sort of structure of the economy, and it's almost this this kind of compressed ladder of opportunity in a way where it's really like getting into these top universities is seen as the just the major sort of gatekeeper for your life, and so there's just this. Driven by this, intense competition. It's even the geographic, I think, concentration here. And the New York Times article mentions some of these factors. It's a weak national pension system, so there's a sense of, we have to do well, as well as possible. Shortage of high-quality blue-collar jobs. It is this kind of very top-heavy structure, kind of a limited upward mobility. And there's this income disparity where it's like if you're not maybe getting in this, desired economic strata, the levels below are quite far away. So there's really, there's just multiple, incentives driven into this. And then, that so much of it is factored around this one particular exam, so it's all sort of funneled into that. And so then hagwons have become this kind of, means of trying to give your kid the best advantage. And, I think it really becomes something like, it's like an arms race, or, you can call it like this collective action problem where, each individual sort of recognizes that maybe this is not great or not healthy, but you don't want to be the one to sort of take a step back and say, oh, I'm going to, disadvantage my kid by taking them out of this, this system. So it just kind of keeps going along. And I think often also there are these times when there are kind of unintended consequences even when the government tries to make adjustments to address some of the challenges. Sometimes it creates even more incentive to get into hagwons. Sometimes when they change the sunung itself in an attempt maybe to make it less competitive or demanding, it's sort of the changing of that makes parents think, oh, now we need to know what the change is. So the hagwons are the place that understand it. I think I was on the show with you around the time of this last sunung when they changed the English exam, and it ended up, I think they tried to make it less competitive, but it ended up becoming more difficult and more people did poorly. And I remember talking to some people afterwards, and it was like, oh, now we need to send our kids to more English, exams at the hagwon. So it kind of just creates this system that, nobody, or it's very rare you don't want to be the one to sort of step out of it. So it kind of keeps, progressing along. And, even as we are seeing, I think more parents are aware of it and are maybe willing to discuss, the downsides of it. The statistic I saw recently was that spending has still jumped more than 60% over the past decade on hagwon enrollment, even as the numbers of students are going down, the population is shrinking. So there's still, and I think another stat I saw was almost 50%, 47.6% of Korean students under the age of 6 are enrolled in hagwons currently. So, you know, it's just really kind of, even though I think there's an awareness of the challenges and the government has been trying to address this for a long time, it just kind of is this perpetuating system. And yeah, I kind of liken it to almost like a nuclear arms race.
Right, and speaking about the government, Chloe, in response, it has spoken very sternly against level tests targeting young children. Do you suppose such government regulations against hagwons will perhaps serve to meaningfully reduce the pressure or stress on students and their parents?
So I'm not that optimistic for now. It's true that the thing you're speaking about, the discussion was coming from the government, was responding also to a public outcry when local media and foreign media alike have been reporting on those cram schools that are kind of for kids as young as 3 or 4 years old. They have to be sitting and getting ready to take an exam to be able to get into language school when they are 4 years old. So that means kids that are way too small to be sitting at the desk would be there spending hours just learning how to write and speak in English. And that's something that people have been really responding very badly to it. And true that the government have been asking hagwons to kind of refrain to those kind of very competitive entrance exam. The thing is, the idea is that to be ready for Suneng, for a lot of parents and children and kids, there's this idea that to be able to master the college entrance exam, you need to have already done all of the English program, all of the mathematics program, all of the Korean program, even before being in high school. So you need to be so much ahead of your class that cram school would be the only solution, just in order to be able to pass this exam kind of in the best condition possible. So that's true that, as Thomas has mentioned, actually, the idea is that the government has been trying to make Suneng easier. For now, it's kind of has backfired. I do believe there is something there that has to be done, because obviously this exam is a no second chance system. Again, you spoke about it just in the previous answer, so I agree with you with Thomas on the fact that it's hard to find an incentive for people to stop sending their kids if they are the only one doing it, because they are kind of thinking that they might be taking their chance for Suneng compared to other children. There's also the fact that hagwon are actually answering to a demand. Like the parents are also putting pressure to be sure that their kids are getting the best education, the hardest tests to be able to level up and get the best possible. So it's kind of both sides. Obviously, hagwon are there to make it hard, but also have the parents asking for it to be harder. And I mean, the only positive thing is I do believe the government has quite a lot of possibilities to work on, a lot of issues to work on. So the prices, for example, of the hagwon, because they're private institutions, so maybe there's something to do that. Also the pressure on children, maybe make sure that the programs are not too advanced. And then obviously the time spent over there. In the New York Times article, they're speaking about some kids who would be spending more than 40 hours a week doing their extracurricular activities in cram school. And I think this is the kind of thing that maybe the government could try to alleviate a bit of the pressure that's put on the kids at such a young age.
Right. In the meantime, Thomas, some people believe that a growing number of young Korean parents are now questioning the traditional definition of academic success, and that they're seeking to keep their children from such intense academic pressure. What have you been hearing and seeing on the ground?
Yeah, I mean, as Chloe mentioned earlier, it is kind of hard, at least maybe as foreign journalists, to really get a good sit down or get, you know, some perspective from the parents especially. And it really is, I think, the mothers, they talk about this in the article as well. It's really a lot of the, you know, responsibility for your children's education seems to fall on mothers more than anything. So, you know, sometimes that's the harder demographic to kind of get sit-downs with. You know, kind of casually, I do have some friends who have school-age students, and I've heard, you know, one thing that people definitely talk about, well, I would say more generally, just to back it up, you do feel that there is a conversation and a kind of a language about this that is going on that I sense is maybe different from an older generation, as far as just talking about things like burnout, stress, you know, work-life balance. I think those, you can see it in the culture more generally, especially among younger generations. And you can even see it in kind of media. I feel like sometimes seeing films or like independent films or something like that, where you see sort of these characters that are facing burnout or going overseas to find themselves, something. So, you can see it's part of the conversation and the culture, which I kind of perceive maybe it wasn't as much among older generations. But, some people that I've talked to, they do talk about wanting to send their kids overseas to study, or just sort of finding a way to get out. Again, as we've been discussing, it is, I think, hard to, from within this system, kind of be brave enough to make that jump, or something. I shouldn't say brave, but be willing to make that leap and remove your kids from this kind of machine if you're planning to stay in the whole in the system. But I have definitely talked to people that either have sent their kids or are planning to send their kids overseas, or sometimes with a couple that is one parent is Korean and one is from a different country, wanting to send their kids to study in that other country. I mean, I think there really is an awareness and a discussion about it. And just even more generally, I think in Korean society, you do hear more about kind of mental health issues and things like work-life balance issues. So, the discussion is there, but I think also, again, it's kind of this, you sense, as they discuss in this article, there is this anxiety underneath all of it. It's like, even if you recognize you don't want to do it, but everybody else is doing it. So I do think there's, some of that sense as well. And, I think also you see just demographically, people are having, we've seen the birth rate is quite low in South Korea, obviously. And, you can also see these kinds of questions as to why people don't want to start families or are starting families later. And, education is certainly a big, just the challenges of it, the expense of it. It's I think South Korea is considered the most expensive country in the world to, raise a child or send a child through school. So, it's very much in the conversation and in the atmosphere, but it's hard to see an easy solution to it.
Right. Chloe, as Thomas just said, quite a number of pundits, they have pointed to the intense education culture here as having affecting the country's birth rate. But on a rather optimistic note, findings for last year show Korea's birth rate has rebounded to 0.8 as of last year, that is 2025. Now, could you tell us a bit more about this uptick in the number of newborns, which was earlier covered by CNN this month, I believe?
Yeah, exactly. So it is a slow but very steady pickup on the numbers. We remember that we've all been covering the fact that the numbers of the birth rate number was going quite low and lower every year recently. But so in 2023, we had 0.721 child per woman. 2024, 0.748, so getting up. And as you were saying, on 2025, we're getting to 0.8 children per woman. So it's been 17 consecutive months as of January, because we don't have the numbers of February yet, that we are seeing an increase, a year-on-year increase in the birth. So that's a good news. Let's just, remember that it's still very low, 0.8. It's still well below the replacement level, that is at 2.1 children per woman, to be able to get a stable population without the import of immigration. And it's still the lowest rate in the world, so it's still something that has to be very careful. We have to be careful with these numbers going on. But as you were saying, CNN, our colleagues from CNN have been covering it. So they went to a baby fair to see some up-to-be or new parents, and they've been asking them the reason why Koreans are having babies again. And so it's interesting to see that most of the parents that they asked to were saying that the main reason was the government incentive and the money that's been going with it, as in saying that they know that it would not be enough, obviously, to raise a child, but they're saying that there's something there. And also the fact that more and more, some woman was saying that around her, she's seeing her friends who are having a second or third child. So there's also this idea of women will be having more kids after raising the first one. You realize, like, well, I can keep going. So there's this idea. And then they've also been discussing, CNN have been also giving two other elements that are maybe more global. The first one is not such a good news, because that would mean that it might stop. They're saying that there's a catch-up effect due to the pandemics, because during that time, people would not get married. It's kind of not happening a lot in Korea to have kids out of the wedlocks of the wedding. So the fact that the people had to wait to get married, they also had to wait to get together, they had to wait to try and get a baby. So that will explain that there is more births because more people have been on the same moment trying to get a kid. And the other thing is, what they're saying is there is a demography effect that is very simple, is that because of the baby boomers, now the kids are in their early or mid-30s, which is kind of the period where for a woman especially you'll try to get children. So that will be more of a very demographical impact. That would be saying there is more people who are at the moment in the prime age to get children, and that would explain why there are more children every month, year on year.
Right. Thomas, here's a tough question for you. Do you believe that we have the right policies in place to sustain this tangible uptick in the number of newborns?
Well, you know, it may be, I think as Chloe just mentioned, certainly that demographic bump and this kind of post-COVID bump, I think are considered probably the strongest drivers of maybe this latest uptick. I mean, but it is clearly there is some evidence that the incentives that Korea is trying to be introducing, these cash allowances, childcare subsidies, some kind of housing support, seem to maybe are having some effect. But I think, it's hard to say, oh, this will have a really, really sweeping effect. It feels a little bit on the margins, and I think a lot of the, the underlying issues that caused this in the first place still need to be addressed, as much as they can. They're not easy to just kind of wave this away, but, we're still sort of talking about affordable housing, the workplace conditions for, this sort of education arms race that we've been discussing, and certainly the balance of work life and the fact that women are the ones that, still are kind of responsible for so much of the childcare responsibilities, as well as their sort of, there has been an increase on something like maternity leave policies, but I think generally people would say that, women are still considered at a disadvantage in the workforce as far as being able to progress in their careers or feeling like, oh, at some point, you're going to leave and have a kid. So, those are just, big challenges that are kind of deeply systemic level, and so, how that can change, but not to say don't keep trying these policies, but there are certain much deeper seated issues, and obviously it's not just Korea facing some of these similar challenges. Most of these sort of so-called developed countries sort of face similar declines in birth rates, but it's obviously been quite extreme here in South Korea. Sometimes when you see some countries that have managed to maybe maintain a little bit of a higher birth rate, even as they're more economically developed, have sort of wider definitions of families. Some countries have single parent households, unmarried couples, same-sex couples. Those are some factors that could potentially make it more, conceivable for people to have children here. But those, these are sort of underlying social issues that you can't necessarily just mandate into existence. So, I think it's potentially we'll see a sustainable upward trend, but I don't think anyone assumes it's going to be a great leap,
Right, yeah, for sure. There are some tasks that still need to be tackled, of course. But for the time being, I suppose we can still celebrate this small uptick in the number of newborns.
Sure, little wins, yeah.
Right. Right, on that note, we'll end today. Thomas, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Chloe, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, that is all the time we have for this edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. See you again same time tomorrow.